Welcome to Know Your Universe. We're going to begin going through the questions that you guys have, but I figured that this is something that we should get started with. What is the New 52 and what is Marvel Now? Once we get through these, we're going to start going through your questions, so please keep leaving your questions in the comments down below. Now, to understand why the New 52 and Marvel Now needed to happen, you need to understand what went wrong with comic books. Comic books are great, but their storylines can be compared to that of a soap opera for teenage boys most of the time. Characters die, they come back, evil twins appear, good guys become bad guys, and sometimes ex-lovers from 20 years ago return. This is the problem though. If you're not following along in every issue, you may miss some key facts here and there, and it's going to take you 3 issues of a story to get yourself even close to back on track. But not only do the storylines get confusing as all hell, but you have some comic series climbing up to some crazy numbers, such as issue 700. Anyone who is brand new into comics isn't going to jump into some random issue numbers that high, especially if they don't understand the way comic arcs work. That would be like kids in 15 years watching episode 8 of Star Wars and wondering why they're confused. Now, this is a common problem for a lot of industries. Video games reboot our favorite game series to get a fresh start. Just look at DMC or Tomb Raider. Our favorite movies get fresh reboots and remakes from 30 years, like, Ocean's 11, or 5 years ago, like Spider-Man. And comic books get their reboots in one of multiple ways. But the way that DC likes to handle a reboot is with a universe reboot. Now, back in the 1980s, DC started this whole universe rebooting trend with the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Basically, they had way too many multiverses and way too many storylines that spanned over 50 years of comics and decided, let's reboot and get a fresh start. So this was supposed to be a new starting point for the DC universe. This way they could condense down the storylines and make it more realistic and fix a few things that they were unhappy with. A key example of them fixing things that they were unhappy with was the death of Supergirl. Superman used to be touted as the last son of Krypton, but as time would go on he got Supergirl, super animals, and varying other random Kryptonian things. This ruined one of the major selling points of the character. How can he be a lone alien trying to cope with being the last one alive when he has all these things to help him through it? So in the Crisis of Infinite Earths, Supergirl was killed and all of the super animals magically vanished. Maybe eventually I'll write up a complete story for the whole storyline that happened there, but since we're here to explain the New 52, let's move forward. This became a reoccurring theme for DC. Continuity is too complex, time for a crisis, and we had an official sequel to this Crisis on Infinite Earths when we had Final Crisis, which is a story that I'm still working on. And I know I've been saying that for a while, but that story is stupid complex, and I'm still working on it. Well, one thing that the reboots were known for was a massive spike in sales, as people would jump on after the events were over and start reading from a new beginning. So, with sales hurting in 2010, DC announced that they would bring us the New 52, a new start for all of the heroes of DC. This would come out of the Flashpoint event in which Flash traveled through time and basically didn't fix time properly. And everything, even the longest running DC books, Action Comics, and Detective Comics would start over from a fresh number 1, giving people a new jumping point. In this new universe, superheroes only came into the scene 5 years before the comic book line. Batman and Superman are being hunted by the police at the start of their careers, and the government of the now current timeline is trying to find a way to utilize the superheroes for their own uses. The supposed first real appearance of all the heroes was the Justice League forming up to stop Darkseid's first attack. Condensing everything into 5 years would have been great, except for the fact that Batman and Green Lantern's continuity were allowed to remain the way they were beforehand. Or were they? DC has remained mostly mum on which events has happened and which events they wanted to remove from the timeline to make things fit. Batman supposedly had all of the Robins and even has Damian now, but he's only around his 30s. And Blackest Night still supposedly happened, or at least I feel like it has, since it gets mentioned near the end of the Jeff Johns run once again, but no one else in the DC universe seems to mention the fact that everyone turned into zombies. And since nobody seems to mention that everyone turned into zombies, most of the extra stories in the Blackest Night wouldn't make much sense anymore, because things like the Green Arrow having his whole family there and him spilling his secrets to them wouldn't make much sense since the new Green Arrow is much younger and follows the TV show Arrow more closely. This also created some controversy as certain events were removed entirely and never revisited. Superman was officially unmarried and he appears to be in his mid-20s now, and Barbara Gordon is now Batgirl again and not paralyzed. But here's the kicker. Since much of Batman's timeline remained, she was still shot by the Joker, she just recovered from living in a wheelchair. As you can see just from that blurb right there, things got very confusing for the New 52 at launch. And honestly, a lot of these early questions we've just learned to ignore as DC fans. It'll be covered eventually, or retconned completely out eventually, or maybe we'll end up hitting the whole thing with another crisis. Well, I'm getting off track and discussing the problems with this, but overall, the New 52 is a fresh reboot for the DC Universe line. Now, following this, there were a few key events that happened, and we have links to all of them in the description down below. These events basically propel the overall storyline of this new universe, which as of right now is working towards the Future's End event that we'll be covering once it's done. But in my opinion, while there have been some hiccups here and there, overall, I've been enjoying the New 52 line of books, and we'll keep buying them. But if you're wondering what and why the New 52 had to happen, well, this is your answer. It was a universe reboot to clean up the continuity so that we can make it more manageable for newcomers to comics. And it did amazing things for DC's sales. So, in response to this, Marvel launched their Marvel Now event, which we'll explain in the next Know Your Universe. It's not a universe reboot, but it was their own idea. And it seems to be working better, and worse at the same time. So I'll explain that next time, and I hope you guys join me for the next Know Your Universe, and I'll see you right here at COMICHISTORIAN.